Adrian Bellaro had been shot twice, poisoned once, and betrayed by 3 men he had personally trained. He had sat across federal prosecutors with a lie so smooth it should have been illegal on its own. He had watched his own father's casket lowered into the ground without blinking. He had ordered things done that kept him awake some nights, though never out of guilt. Only calculation, checking the angles for what he might have missed. Adrian Bellaro did not know fear anymore. Fear had been surgically removed from him somewhere around age 19. The night his father handed him a gun and told him the family did not survive on hope. He was 34 years old now, and he had built something even his father never managed, an empire with 2 faces. One face was Bellaro Capital and Maritime, 40 floors of glass in Lower Manhattan, shipping contracts and private equity filings, and a board of directors who believed, mostly, that they worked for a legitimate man. The other face lived beneath that one, in ledgers no auditor would ever see, in ports where certain containers never got inspected, in the quiet arrangements that kept certain judges comfortable and certain rivals dead. He had made peace with being both faces a long time ago. Tonight he sat where he always sat, table by the window, 70 floors above the city, back to the wall, sightlines to every door. The restaurant was his, technically, though the world knew it as Solera, a reservation-only room so exclusive that half of Manhattan's old money had never even seen the inside of it. Candles burned low and gold. The city spread out beneath the window like a motherboard, veins of light running in every direction, and Adrian ate alone here 3 nights a week because solitude was the only luxury he trusted completely. Nico Valente sat across from him, going over numbers on a tablet, turned away from the waitstaff. "The Panama account's clear next week," Nico said. "After that, we're down to 11 shell entities instead of 34. You wanted clean by Christmas. We'll be close." "Close isn't clean," Adrian said, not looking up from his glass. "No. But it's further than your father ever got." Adrian allowed himself the smallest curl at the corner of his mouth. That was the closest thing to affection he showed most people, and Nico had earned it over 11 years of loyalty that had never once wavered, not even when wavering would have been the smart move. Then the elevator chimed at the far end of the room. Adrian didn't look. He never looked right away, old habit, the kind that kept men alive. He waited 3 seconds, let his eyes drift up naturally, the way a man checks a passing waiter, and his entire body went still. Sofia Marquez stood in the doorway of his restaurant. 3 years had not diminished her. If anything, she stood taller now, her dark hair swept back instead of loose the way she used to wear it, a blazer replacing the soft sweaters he remembered. Every part of her sharpened into something more composed, more certain. She was scanning the room the way people do when they're deciding whether they belong somewhere, and for one suspended second, Adrian forgot how to make his lungs work. Then he saw the 3 boys standing around her, 3 of them, identical, black hair, small, still faces that hadn't yet learned to perform for strangers. They wore matching navy coats, the kind an exhausted mother buys in bulk because there's no time to shop 3 separate times, and they stood close to Sophia's legs the way children do when a room feels too big. Adrian's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "Boss," Nico said quietly, without turning his head. His voice had dropped into the register he used only for real danger. "Count the children." Adrian counted. 3. He counted again, because some part of his mind refused the math the first time. Black hair, not Sophia's warm brown, but a black so deep it looked almost blue under restaurant light, his own color. And when one of the boys turned his head to look up at his mother, Adrian saw the eyes, slate gray. Not blue, not hazel, the exact, unmistakable gray that had been in every Bellaro portrait going back 4 generations. The color his own mother used to call the family's curse, because you can never lie with eyes like that. The jawline. Even at 3 years old, it was there, the same set to it, stubborn and sharp, that Adrian saw in the mirror every morning while shaving. "Boss," Nico said again, softer now, almost reverent. "Those are yours." Adrian did not remember standing up. He only remembered that one moment he was seated, and the next he was walking, weaving between white tablecloths like a man moving through water. The entire practiced control of 11 years dissolving out from under him with every step. The restaurant noticed. Of course it noticed. A man who ran the room without ever raising his voice was suddenly crossing it like gravity itself had shifted, and conversations dimmed in his wake the way lights dim when a storm rolls over a city. Sophia saw him before he reached the table. Her face did something complicated. Recognition, then disbelief, then something that looked, for one unguarded second, like old grief resurfacing all at once. She straightened instinctively, a hand settling protectively on the shoulder of the boy nearest her. One of the boys, small, chin lifted, entirely unbothered by the tension rippling through the grown-ups above him, looked up at Adrian with open curiosity. "You look like me and my brothers," the boy said. The words landed in Adrian's chest like a bullet he hadn't seen coming, the kind he used to be able to dodge. The restaurant had gone nearly silent now. Somewhere behind him, Adrian was aware of Nico rising halfway from his own seat, ready to intervene, ready to protect, not yet sure from what. Adrian sat down at Sophia's table without being invited. He had never in his life needed permission for anything. Tonight, some old forgotten part of him almost asked for it anyway. "How old are they?" His voice came out lower than he intended, rough at the edges. Sophia's throat moved as she swallowed. Her eyes held his, steady even now, even with 3 years of unspoken history sitting between them like a loaded weapon. 3, she said. Adrian looked at the boys again. Really looked. The quiet one in the middle, watching him with an assessing stillness that unsettled even a man who had built a career on reading rooms. The one with softer eyes, already leaning slightly closer to his mother, sensing something was wrong before he understood why. And the third, grinning without a trace of caution, already reaching for the breadbasket at the center of the table like the tension in the air belonged to someone else's evening. 3 years old. Adrian did the math the way he did every calculation in his life. Instantly, completely, without mercy for himself. 4 months. 4 months he had spent as a man named Adam Mercer. 4 months of pancakes burned black on Sophia's stovetop, of taxi rides looping Central Park because she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder. And he hadn't wanted the ride to end, of pretending, for the first and only time in his adult life, that he was ordinary. 3 years since the lobby. Since the guns. Since he had told her to disappear. "Sophia," he said, and her name came out of him like something excavated. "Are they?" "Not here," she said quietly, cutting him off before the word could finish forming, her eyes flicking once toward her sons and back to him with a warning sharper than any blade he'd ever held. "We are not doing this in front of them." Adrian closed his mouth. He understood the command in her voice, the same iron under velvet he remembered from 3 years ago, except now it carried the weight of motherhood behind it, a fortress built specifically to keep him, or anyone, from getting close enough to hurt what stood behind her. But he already knew. He had known since the elevator chimed. He had 3 sons, and he had missed every single day of their lives. 3 years earlier, Sofia Marquez had lived on the 4th floor of a walk-up in the East Village, in an apartment too small for the number of books she owned, and exactly the right size for one careful, disciplined life. She worked as a forensic accountant, the kind hired by law firms and insurance companies to find the lie hiding inside numbers that looked, to everyone else, perfectly clean. She was good at her job because she did not believe anything until she had checked it 3 separate ways. It was, she often joked, the least romantic skill set a person could have. She met a man named Adam Mercer at a mutual friend's engagement party, a gathering full of finance bros and forced laughter that she'd nearly skipped entirely. He was quiet in a room that rewarded loudness. He asked her 2 questions about her work and then actually listened to the answers, which nobody at that party had done all night. "Private equity," he told her when she asked what he did. "Boring. Ask me something else. Do you burn toast?" "Every time," he said, entirely serious. "It's a gift." She laughed before she meant to. That was the first thing Adam Mercer ever gave her, a laugh she hadn't planned on. 4 months unfolded after that the way good things sometimes do, quietly, without announcement. He came over on Sunday mornings and destroyed her kitchen trying to make pancakes, insisting every time that this batch would be different, and every time producing something closer to charcoal. She would eat them anyway, and he would watch her eat them with an expression she couldn't quite name back then, something between amusement and disbelief, like he was watching a miracle happen in real time. He remembered things, small things, that she took her coffee with too much cream, that she hated when people finished her sentences, that her mother had died when she was 19 and she didn't like talking about it directly, so he never asked directly, he just made sure she never had to be alone on the anniversary. One night in October, she fell asleep against his shoulder in the back of a cab circling Central Park, and when she woke an hour later they were still circling, the meter climbing steadily, and he hadn't woken her. "You could have told the driver to stop," she mumbled, disoriented. "I didn't want it to be over yet," he said. She didn't understand until much later how strange that sentence was, coming from a man who supposedly measured his life in quarterly returns. She didn't understand. because she didn't yet know that everything he'd told her about himself was a costume, carefully tailored, worn specifically so he could feel, for 4 months, like an ordinary man deserved something as simple as this. The costume came off on a Tuesday night in March. She remembered the sound first. Engines, several of them, too loud for her quiet block, cutting off in unison outside her building like a held breath. Then her phone rang. Adam's name on the screen. His voice when she answered was a register she had never heard from him. "Sophia, come down. Now, do exactly as I say." She went down because his voice left no room for anything else. The lobby of her building did not look like her lobby anymore. Black SUVs lined the curb outside. Doors open, men in dark suits positioned like they were guarding something precious. And in the middle of them stood Adam. Except he wasn't standing like Adam. He stood like a man built entirely of consequence, a sidearm visible beneath his jacket, a ring on his hand she'd never noticed before, engraved with a wolf's head crest that suddenly meant everything and nothing to her at once. "My name is not Adam Mercer," he said. His voice had no warmth left in it. "It's Adrian Bellaro." She had heard that name before. Everyone in New York had heard that name before, whispered in the specific tone reserved for things people didn't want to attract by naming too loudly. "There are people who would hurt you to hurt me," he said. "They are close. Tonight. You need to pack a bag. You need to leave this city. You need to disappear, and you need to forget you ever knew my name. Adrian." The name felt foreign in her mouth, a stranger's name attached to a face she loved. "Sophia." He said it like a closing door. "This was a mistake. You were never supposed to matter this much. Go." She would understand, years later, that he had built that cruelty on purpose, brick by brick, specifically so that she would run instead of stay, specifically so that whatever chance existed of her staying to help him, to fight beside him, to become a target permanently, would die right there in that lobby along with everything soft he'd let her see for 4 months. She didn't understand it that night. That night, she only understood that the man she loved had looked at her like she was a liability being managed, and she had never in her life felt so completely disposed of. "I hope whatever empire you're building," she said, her voice shaking with a fury that surprised even her, "is worth being completely alone inside it." She turned and walked back into the building. She did not look back to see his face. If she had, she might have seen that her words had landed exactly the way a bullet lands, clean, precise, and permanent. She packed a bag that night. She left the city within the week. She never saw Adam Mercer or Adrian Bellaro again. She did not know, standing in that lobby, that she was already 6 weeks pregnant. She found out on a Thursday morning in a pharmacy 2 states away. In a small apartment she'd rented under her middle name because some instinct told her not to trust her own name yet. She bought 3 different pregnancy tests, 3 different brands. She was a forensic accountant. She did not trust single-source confirmation for anything, not tax filings, not insurance claims, and certainly not the single most terrifying possibility of her adult life. All 3 came back the same. She sat on the edge of her bathtub for a long time afterward, staring at 3 small plastic sticks lined up on the sink like evidence in a case she couldn't yet close. She thought about calling him. For exactly 1 night, she let herself imagine it. Dialing a number she'd already deleted, hearing his voice, telling him the truth. She imagined his face. She imagined, too, the black SUVs, the guns, the men who'd stood in her lobby like soldiers waiting for an order. She thought about a childhood defined by targets instead of birthday parties, bodyguards instead of friends, a world where love came wrapped in danger so thick it eventually strangled the love itself. She made her decision before the sun came up. She would raise this child. Children, the doctor would later tell her, correcting the singular with a stunned smile. Triplets, a genetic lottery so rare her obstetrician asked twice if there was a family history, without Adrian Bellaro ever knowing they existed. Not out of spite. She was honest enough with herself to know that. It would have been easier if it were spite. Spite burns out eventually. This was something colder and more permanent. A decision made by a woman who understood better than most exactly what kind of ledger Adrian Bellaro's world kept, and exactly what column her children would be entered into the moment his enemies learned they existed. She built a life instead. She moved to a modest house in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, the kind with a stoop and a tree out front and neighbors who waved but didn't ask too many questions. She started a remote forensic accounting practice, taking on corporate fraud cases and insurance audits from a home office crowded with baby monitors and, eventually, 3 matching cribs jammed into one room because the house had only 2 bedrooms. and she needed the second one for storage of things 3 babies apparently required in industrial quantities. She hired a night nurse for the first 6 brutal months, because no human being, however determined, survives newborn triplets alone. She found a babysitter named Doreen 2 blocks over who became something closer to family than employee. She built client relationships slowly, carefully, the kind of reputation that took years and could be destroyed in one bad reference. And she guarded that reputation the same way she guarded everything else, with total, exhausting vigilance. She was tired in a way she never fully recovered from. She learned to function on 4 hours of sleep stitched together across a night in 40-minute increments. She learned the specific hollow ache of holding 3 crying infants and being only one person with only 2 arms. And she loved them with a ferocity that surprised even her, a love with teeth in it, the kind that made her check the locks twice every night and read every ingredient label twice, and interview 4 separate pediatricians before choosing one. Matteo arrived first, by 4 minutes, and grew into the quiet one, watchful, precise, the kind of toddler who stacked blocks by size before knocking them down, who noticed when a picture frame had been moved 2 inches, who studied new people with a stillness that made adults feel, faintly, that they were being evaluated by someone far older than 3. Leo arrived second, softer somehow from the very beginning, the one who cried when his brothers cried and laughed hardest when they laughed, who climbed into Sophia's lap at the smallest disturbance and needed, more than his brothers, to be held through the dark. Rafa arrived last, and immediately made clear he intended to make up for lost time. He was fearless in a way that aged Sophia 5 years by his 2nd birthday, climbing furniture, negotiating with the ferocity of a union boss over bedtime, charming his way out of consequences with a grin that Sophia recognized, with a jolt from a man she'd spent 3 years trying not to think about. She became strong. Not because any of it was easy, none of it was ever easy, but because there was no one else coming. She learned that strength wasn't a feeling you waited to arrive. It was a decision you made every single morning, usually before coffee, usually while wiping oatmeal off a wall. By the time the boys turned 3, Sophia Marquez had built something entirely her own, imperfect, exhausting, and completely, fiercely hers. She had no idea that the past was about to walk back into her life wearing a tailored suit and eyes the exact color of her son's. Back in the private corridor off Solera's main dining room, the noise of the restaurant fell away behind heavy soundproofed doors, leaving only the 2 of them and years of unfinished business. You had a decision to make, Adrian said. His voice was low, controlled in the way that meant he was working very hard to keep it that way. That decision belonged to me too. Sophia's arms crossed over her chest, a wall she'd built out of instinct after years of not needing anyone else's shoulder to lean on. You made the first decision, Adrian, in that lobby. When you told me to forget your name, I was trying to protect you. I know that. I have known that for 3 years. Her voice cracked slightly, the only sign of how much this was costing her to say out loud. And I made the same choice, for the same reason, except mine was for 3 children instead of 1 woman. I was protecting them from the exact thing you were protecting me from. Adrian's jaw tightened. Somewhere in his chest, an old, cold logic tried to argue that she had no right, that a father's blood entitled him to knowledge regardless of the danger attached to it. He recognized the thought for what it was, the same entitlement his own father had wielded like a birthright, and he pushed it down before it could reach his mouth. I missed 3 years, he said instead, quieter now. Their first words, their first steps, whatever nightmares Leo has. I don't even know if he has nightmares, but I'd bet my life he does, because I did at that age, and I missed all of it. You did, Sophia said, and there was no cruelty in it, only fact, the kind she dealt in professionally. That's the cost. That's what happens when 2 people both decide, separately, that the other person can't be trusted with the truth. I'm not asking to be forgiven tonight. Adrian's eyes held hers, steady despite everything churning beneath the surface. I'm telling you I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure I'm never absent from theirs again. Before Sophia could answer, the corridor door opened without a knock, a violation of protocol so complete that Adrian was already turning before Nico finished stepping through it. Boss. Nico's face had gone flat and professional, the expression he wore only when the situation had teeth. 2 men just walked into the main room, Serbian crew, Draško's people. One of them's got a photo on his phone, it's her. He nodded once tightly towards Sophia. They're not subtle about it. They want to be seen. Adrian's entire posture changed in half a second, the warmth of the last exchange folding away like a blade retracting into its handle. This was the register the city feared him in. Cold, immediate, absolute. "Get the car around back," he said. Now, Sophia did not scream. She did not freeze. 3 years of raising triplets alone had trained something into her more useful than panic, decisiveness. "Get my children," she said, already moving toward the door. Now. The next 4 minutes moved with the compressed, adrenal clarity of a controlled demolition. Nico cleared the service corridor first, waving off 2 waitstaff who'd wandered too close to the private elevator, his hand never quite leaving the inside of his jacket. Adrian scooped Rafa up before the boy could protest, tucking him against his shoulder with a firmness that surprised them both. Sophia had Leo's hand in one of hers and Mateo's in the other, the boy's small fingers gripping back with the intensity of a child who understood, without being told, that something was wrong. Margaret Chen, a silver-haired regular Adrian recognized from the corner banquette, a woman who'd once run a hedge fund and had apparently decided decades ago that nothing in life warranted visible alarm, fell into step beside Sophia in the corridor without being asked, murmuring something low and steady about counting streetlights out the window, a trick that kept Leo's eyes fixed forward instead of on the tension radiating from every adult around him. "Elevator's clean," Nico called back. "Garage in 90 seconds. The private elevator dropped them 30 floors in a silence broken only by Rafa's small voice, muffled against Adrian's shoulder. "Are we playing a game?" "Something like that," Adrian said, and was startled by how gentle his own voice came out, how naturally the lie arranged itself to protect a 3-year-old from a truth that would have terrified him. The garage smelled like exhaust and cold concrete. 3 armored SUVs sat idling in a tight formation, doors already open, Adrian's men moving with the wordless efficiency of people who had rehearsed exactly this kind of night more times than any of them wanted to admit. Sophia climbed into the middle vehicle first, pulling Mateo and Leo in after her. Adrian set Rafa down gently onto the seat beside his mother, and the boy, even now, even in the chaos, turned and looked up at Adrian with wide, unshaken eyes. "Are you coming with us?" Rafa asked. The question landed somewhere Adrian hadn't expected to be hit. He had made vows before, to his father's memory, to the organization, to men who bled for him and expected loyalty in return. None of those vows had ever tightened his throat the way this small, simple question did. "Yes," Adrian said, and meant it more completely than he had meant almost anything in his adult life. "I am." He climbed in after them. The door sealed shut. The convoy pulled out of the garage into the Manhattan night, and somewhere behind them, 2 men in a restaurant realized their targets had already gone. The safe house was a narrow townhouse in a quiet stretch of the West Village, reinforced behind a facade so unremarkable that 3 separate architecture blogs had, at various points, called it charmingly dated, without ever suspecting the steel core behind its brick. It had been prepared, within the hour, for exactly this kind of emergency. Bulletproof glass, a panic room, disguised as a wine cellar, 6 armed men rotating through discreet posts on the block. It had not, however, been prepared for 3 3-year-olds. Nico stood in the kitchen doorway 40 minutes after arrival, visibly losing an argument with Leo over the correct number of juice boxes appropriate before bedtime. 2, Nico said, in the same tone he used to negotiate with dockworkers' union bosses. 3, Leo said, holding up 3 fingers with absolute conviction. 2 is the deal. 3, Leo repeated, and something in his small, steady insistence made the most dangerous enforcer south of 14th Street exhale in defeat and hand over the 3rd juice box like he'd just lost a hostage negotiation. Sophia watched this from the hallway with an expression that, for the first time all night, softened into something close to amusement. Adrian caught her eye across the kitchen, and for one unguarded second, something old and warm passed between them before both of them remembered, separately, everything standing in the way of it. Once the boys were settled with Doreen, summoned by secure car, and thoroughly, if gently, questioned by Nico's security detail before being allowed anywhere near the house, Sophia and Adrian sat across from each other at the kitchen island, the space between them heavy with everything still unsaid. "I need terms," Sophia said before he could speak. Her voice was steady, professional, the voice of a woman used to negotiating from a position she'd built for herself rather than one handed to her. "I am not your property, Adrian. I never was, even when I thought I loved you completely. My children are not leverage, not for you, not for anyone who might come after you. When this threat is handled, and I mean handled, not managed, not contained, handled, I decide where we live, not you." Adrian listened. He did not interrupt. 3 years ago, he would have folded her terms into a decision he'd already made for both of them, dressed as protection, delivered as an order. Tonight he understood, with a clarity that had cost him 3 years and 1 restaurant to earn, that the version of himself who'd forced her hand in that lobby had no right to survive this conversation. "Agreed," he said simply. Sophia studied him, waiting for the qualification, the exception. The fine print men like him always attached to promises. It didn't come. "For 3 years," Adrian said instead, "I've been restructuring the organization, divesting the parts that can't survive daylight. What's left of Bellaro Capital by next year will be a shipping and real estate company that happens to have an ugly history, not an ugly present. Why? Because you told me, in that lobby, that I'd built an empire not worth being alone inside of. I couldn't stop hearing it." He said this plainly, without performance, the way a man states a fact he's already made peace with. "I didn't want to keep building something that made love impossible. Even if I never saw you again, even if it was only ever going to be for my own sake." Sophia's expression didn't soften easily. 3 years of vigilance didn't unlearn itself from one confession, but something in her posture shifted, marginally, the way a fortress wall might shift half an inch under sustained, patient pressure. "Prove it," she said. Adrian reached into his jacket and produced a slim folder, transition documents he carried, apparently as a matter of habit, evidence of a life he'd been quietly rebuilding for years before he ever knew he had a reason beyond his own conscience. Sophia read them the way she read everything. 3 times, without trust extended freely. Within minutes, her pen was moving, circling 2 misclassified holding entities, flagging a real estate transfer structured in a way that would trigger an audit flag within 18 months if left uncorrected. "This entity here," she said, tapping the page. "You've got it filed as a pass-through when it should be a disregarded entity for tax purposes. It's a small error, but it's the kind of small error that turns into a federal case in 3 years if nobody catches it." Adrian looked at the correction, then at her, something close to genuine respect breaking through the tension in his face. "You're right. I know I'm right. I do this professionally. I know you do." He said it without ego, without the reflexive need most men in his position had to defend their own work. "Fix it. Whatever else you find, fix it. I'll pay your rate." "I'm not doing this for your rate," Sophia said, though the corner of her mouth had, almost against her will, lifted slightly. "I'm doing this because sloppy paperwork gets people killed in your world, and I have 3 reasons now not to let that happen to you." It was the closest thing to warmth either of them had allowed since the restaurant. Adrian let himself feel it for exactly as long as he could before the next crisis arrived to remind them both how far they still had to go. The crisis arrived at 2:14 in the morning, in the form of a text from an unknown number to Sophia's phone. She'd stepped into the small study off the kitchen to check her email, a habit so ingrained even chaos couldn't fully override it, when the message came through, a single photo, no caption. Her townhouse in Brooklyn, front door standing open. Someone had been inside. Sophia's hand did not shake. 3 years of forensic work had trained something into her that panic couldn't easily dislodge. The ability to look directly at the worst evidence available and process it clinically before letting herself feel anything about it. She walked back into the kitchen and set the phone down in front of Adrian without a word. He looked at the image for 1 second, and his entire face changed. The last trace of the man who'd sat awkwardly negotiating juice boxes an hour earlier disappearing entirely, replaced by something colder and infinitely more competent. "They know the address," he said. "They knew before tonight. This isn't reactive. This took planning." Sophia's voice stayed level even as her mind raced through implications, with the same rigor she applied to a fraud case. "They've been watching me for longer than 1 evening at a restaurant, Adrian." Adrian was already dialing Nico full sweep of the Brooklyn property. "Nobody goes in until it's cleared. I want cameras. I want—" "Adrian." Sophia's voice cut through his, not sharp, but absolute. "Tell me what you need." He paused, phone still at his ear, and looked at her. Really looked. The way he had in the restaurant when the world had first tilted sideways. He had spent 3 years imagining her as something fragile he'd failed to protect. He was looking, now, at a woman who had spent those same 3 years building herself into someone who did not need protecting so much as she needed to be let in. "I need everything you have," he said slowly. "On the Serbians. Draško's people. Whatever you've watched, whatever you've tracked. 3 years of looking over your shoulder, Sophia, you didn't just survive it. You documented it, didn't you?" Something flickered across her face, surprise, then something closer to grim satisfaction. I've had a file open on Drashko Petrovic's network since 8 months after I left New York, she admitted. I told myself it was academic curiosity, forensic habit. I think some part of me always knew this night was coming. Adrian set the phone down slowly. Show me. What Sophia produced over the next 3 hours was not the work of a frightened woman hiding from a threat. It was the work of a forensic accountant who had spent 3 years turning fear into methodology. Her laptop screen filled with a dossier so thorough it made even Nico, standing over her shoulder with a coffee going cold in his hand, let out a low whistle. Shell companies stacked 6 layers deep across 4 jurisdictions, offshore accounts in Cyprus and the Caymans, cross-referenced against real estate holdings in 3 states that existed on paper only to launder cash from a trafficking operation disguised as a shipping concern. Political protection payments routed through a nonprofit foundation with a board of directors who had never once met in person. False invoices for construction materials that were never delivered to buildings that didn't exist. Insurance fraud claims filed against warehouses that burned suspiciously well and suspiciously often. I built this, Sophia said, not looking up from the screen, the way I build every case. Assume nothing. Verify everything 3 separate ways. I have wire transfer records. I have Shell entity registration filings. I have insurance claim numbers cross-referenced against fire department incident reports across 2 states. This is enough to end them, Adrian said quietly, scrolling through pages of meticulously sourced financial evidence. Not just Drashko's crew here, this reaches back to the network funding him. I know, Sophia said. I've known for a while what I was sitting on. I just never had anywhere safe to send it. Because sending it meant admitting the threat was real. And admitting the threat was real meant admitting I might need to explain to someone, someday, why a woman with no obvious connection to organized crime had built a file this thorough on a Serbian trafficking network. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. You built this alone. While raising 3 children alone. While running a business alone. While you weren't available, Sophia said, without malice, simply stating the arithmetic of the last 3 years. It should have landed as an accusation. Instead, unexpectedly, Adrian laughed, a short, genuine sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. The first real laugh either of them had shared in 3 years, cracking something loose in the tension that had gripped the house since the restaurant. You are terrifying, he said, and it was, from him, the highest compliment he knew how to give. By 4 a.m., Sophia had transmitted the dossier through an encrypted channel to a trusted contact at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a former colleague who owed her a favor from a case 3 years back, and asked no questions when she called at 4 in the morning, with a file that would end careers and freeze assets across 2 continents. While she worked the financial front, Adrian worked the physical one. His men located Drashko's advance team within the hour, the 2 who'd walked into Solera and a 3rd who'd been surveilling Sophia's Brooklyn townhouse for the better part of a week. By dawn, the immediate threat on the ground had been neutralized, contained through channels that Adrian did not detail to Sophia, and that she deliberately did not ask him to. By sunrise, federal asset freezes hit 6 accounts simultaneously. Banking alerts flagged transactions across 3 jurisdictions. A network that had operated with impunity for over a decade collapsed in the span of one overnight financial siege, brought down not by bullets but by ledgers, by a woman who had spent 3 years turning her fear into evidence. Adrian returned to the townhouse a little after 6, a shallow cut above one eyebrow, the only visible sign of the night's physical work, moving with the controlled exhaustion of a man who had not slept but would not admit it. Sophia was still at the kitchen island, hair falling loose from its earlier arrangement, dark circles under her eyes that told their own story of an all-nighter spent staring at spreadsheets instead of guns. She slid a printed confirmation across the counter without a word, the federal freeze notification, time-stamped and clean. You built this alone, Adrian said again, quieter this time, something like awe threading through the exhaustion in his voice. While raising them, Sophia said, you weren't available. This time when he laughed, it came out lower, warmer, something in his chest finally unclenching for the first time in 3 years. The threat did not disappear overnight, but it did break. Federal indictments moving through the system by the end of that week, Drashko's remaining operational capacity crippled beyond any meaningful retaliation, the kind of collapse that took organized networks years to rebuild, if they rebuilt at all. Sophia did not immediately return to Brooklyn. The townhouse needed to be swept, cleared, and reinforced before Adrian would agree to let the boys back inside it, and Sophia, cautious in a way 3 years of solo parenting had trained into her bones, did not argue the point. Adrian did not demand anything in return for the 3 weeks that followed. He did not press for forgiveness, did not attempt the kind of grand romantic gesture that men in his position sometimes mistook for genuine repair. Instead, he showed up. Every single day. He learned, in the first week, that Matteo needed routine the way other children needed affection. A schedule laid out clearly each morning, transitions announced ahead of time, surprises handled only with careful warning. Adrian adjusted without being asked twice, and by the second week Matteo had started sliding a small hand into his, without prompting during their evening walk around the block. A silent verdict passed by the most cautious of the 3 boys. He learned that Leo woke most nights around 2 a.m. from dreams he couldn't yet articulate, and that the only thing that settled him back to sleep was a low voice speaking softly in a language his ears somehow recognized before his conscious mind could. Adrian discovered this by accident the first night, murmuring an old Italian lullaby his own grandmother used to hum, half to himself, half out of some instinct he didn't examine too closely. And Leo's crying stopped almost instantly, the boy's small body going slack with relief against Adrian's shoulder. He learned that Rafa negotiated bedtime with the shameless confidence of a man 20 times his age, extracting one more story, then one more glass of water, then one more 5 minutes with the tenacity of someone who had clearly inherited his father's negotiating instincts along with his eyes. 5 more minutes, Rafa announced one night, arms crossed, chin lifted in an expression so precisely Adrian's own that Sophia, watching from the doorway, had to press a hand to her mouth to keep from laughing too. Adrian said, testing the same line Nico had used on Leo over the juice boxes. 4, 3, final offer. Deal, Rafa said, and shook his father's hand with the gravity of a man closing a merger, before promptly falling asleep 90 seconds later. Adrian cut toast wrong more times than he cared to admit. Too thick, too thin, cut diagonally when Matteo very clearly required it cut into squares. An error corrected with such solemn 3-year-old disappointment that Adrian found himself, on the 4th morning, standing over a cutting board with the focused intensity he usually reserved for reviewing wire transfer logs. He attended, on the 2nd Saturday, a tea party convened at a table roughly 8 inches off the ground, and sat the most feared man in the tri-state area, a man whose name alone had ended careers and, on occasion, lives, folded into a chair built for a child half his size, accepting an invisible cup of tea from Leo with the same gravity he'd once used to close a 9-figure shipping deal. More tea? Leo asked. Please, Adrian said, and meant it. He read bedtime stories badly at first, flat, unpracticed, a man more accustomed to reading contracts than picture books, and improved slowly, learning which voices Rafa demanded for the wolf, which pages Leo needed slowed down because he liked to look at the illustrations longer, which parts Matteo corrected him on if he skipped even a single word of the text. He let them climb on him without flinching, though every instinct he'd built over 2 decades screamed against letting anyone get that physically close, that unguarded, that able to reach the parts of him he kept locked away from everyone but Nico. He didn't use money as a shortcut to their affection, didn't buy them toys stacked to the ceiling, didn't try to purchase forgiveness in bulk the way lesser men might have. He used time instead, the one currency his old life had never taught him how to spend wisely, and he spent it now with a discipline that surprised even him. Sophia watched all of it from a careful distance, her guard lowering by degrees she didn't announce and barely acknowledged even to herself. It wasn't the grand speeches that moved her. She'd learned, 3 years ago, exactly how little a speech was worth against a lifetime of absence. It was the ordinary things, the toast cut into squares, the lullaby in a language she didn't speak, the 5-minute negotiations conducted with total seriousness at a bedtime that mattered to no one but 3 small boys and the father learning, one clumsy day at a time, how to be present for it. He wasn't trying to buy her forgiveness. He was earning familiarity, one unremarkable evening at a time, and Sophia found, despite every wall she'd built over 3 years specifically to prevent this, that familiarity was doing something to her resolve that speeches never could have. Near the end of the 3rd week, Adrian asked her to sit with him in the small study off the kitchen, the same room where the photo of her broken-into townhouse had first arrived weeks earlier, now repurposed for gentler conversations. I want to offer you something professionally, he said, overseeing the financial transition of the organization into legitimate operations. You've already found errors in 3 days that my compliance team missed for a year. I need someone who thinks the way you think, permanently, not as a favor during a crisis. Sophia considered this with the same careful weighing she gave every serious decision. I'd need full authority to flag anything, including things you don't want flagged. Agreed. I wouldn't want it any other way. She nodded slowly, filing the offer away for the kind of consideration it deserved. Professional, weighable, separate from everything else tangled up between them. There's something else, Adrian said, and something in his voice shifted, the confident negotiator falling away to reveal something rawer underneath. 3 years ago, my worst mistake wasn't letting you go. I've turned that lobby over in my head 1,000 times, and I still believe, even now, that getting you out of that danger was the right call. My worst mistake was failing to become someone worth staying for in the first place. Someone whose world didn't force a choice like that at all. He paused, and Sophia said nothing, letting him continue. I've spent 3 years trying to become that man, not because I hoped you'd come back. I didn't let myself hope for that most days. I did it because your words in that lobby never stopped being true, and I didn't want to die inside an empire that made a life like this impossible. He gestured faintly toward the sounds of 3 small boys arguing over a puzzle in the next room. Now I have a reason bigger than my own conscience. Now I want the chance to prove I've actually become someone worth staying for. Not tonight, not because of one good speech. Over time. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, turning the words over the way she turned over evidence, testing them for weight, for consistency, for whether they'd hold up under scrutiny 3 months from now, a year from now, a decade from now. I'll review the transition documents professionally, she said finally. That part I can commit to right now, because it's work, and work I know how to trust. And personally? Personally, Sophia said, her voice steady but not unkind. I need more time. 3 weeks of watching you cut toast wrong doesn't undo 3 years, Adrian. I believe you're trying. I don't yet know if trying is the same thing as becoming, and I won't pretend otherwise just because it would be easier for both of us. Adrian nodded, and something in his chest, some old hardwired instinct to push, to close the deal, to force the outcome he wanted through sheer will, stayed silent. He had spent his entire adult life forcing outcomes. This was the first time he understood completely that forcing this one would destroy it. Take the time you need, he said. I'm not going anywhere. He did not pressure her further. He did not raise it again that week, or the next. And it was precisely that restraint, the absence of the old Adrian who would have found 6 clever ways to accelerate her decision, that did more to earn her trust than any argument he might have made. It was Matteo who broke through first. 2 days after that conversation, the boy came running into the kitchen where Adrian stood at the counter, attempting, with grim determination, to cut a stack of toast into the correct configuration of squares. Matteo crossed the room with the unusual urgency of a child who rarely rushed anything, and wrapped both small arms around Adrian's legs with a fierceness that nearly knocked him off balance. I decided, Matteo announced, looking up with the same solemn precision he brought to everything. You're keeping us. Adrian went very still. He had faced down men with guns without his pulse changing. He had sat across federal investigators and lied without a flicker crossing his face. He had buried his own father with dry eyes because some part of him had decided decades ago that showing anything was the same as showing weakness. He knelt down slowly until he was at eye level with his son, and something in his face, something he had not let anyone see since he was younger than Matteo was now, cracked open. Yeah? His voice came out rough, unsteady in a way he couldn't quite control. Yeah, Matteo said with total 3-year-old confidence, as though the matter had never been in question at all. You cut toast wrong every day and you still keep trying. That means you're keeping us. Adrian pulled his son into his arms, and for one long moment he did not trust his own voice to say anything at all. He did not sob. Some deeply ingrained control held that line, even now, but his control cracked audibly enough that when he finally exhaled, it came out shaking. From the doorway, Sophia watched, one hand pressed lightly against the frame, her own eyes bright with something she hadn't let herself feel fully in 3 years. She had built every wall around herself with good reason. She had guarded her heart the way she guarded her clients' finances, thoroughly, professionally, with backup verification for every decision. She had told herself she needed more time, and she had meant it. But watching her most cautious child hand his trust to Adrian so completely, so simply, without the complicated calculus adults brought to forgiveness, watching Adrian receive that trust like it was the single most valuable thing he'd ever been handed, Something in Sophia's carefully maintained resolve shifted in a way 3 weeks of grown-up conversation never quite managed. Her son had built the bridge she wasn't yet ready to build herself. That night, after the boys had finally settled into sleep following the customary negotiations, Adrian stood in the doorway of their shared room for a long time, watching 3 small chests rise and fall in the dim glow of a nightlight shaped like a lighthouse. He looked, in that moment, like a man confronting the only thing in his entire adult life he had not yet found some way to destroy. Every empire he'd built had cost something. Loyalty traded for fear, safety purchased with violence, power maintained through a ledger of debts that never fully balanced. This 3 small sleeping faces that carried his jawline and his eyes, and apparently his stubbornness in Rafa's case and his caution in Mateo's, this was untouched by any of it. This was the one thing left in his life that his old world hadn't managed to corrupt. Sophia came to stand beside him, without a word, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, both of them watching the same 3 small shapes breathing steadily in the dark. "They have your eyes," she said quietly. "They have your stubbornness," Adrian said. "Is that your idea of a compliment?" "It's the greatest one I know how to give," Adrian said, and meant it completely. Sophia let out a breath that was almost a laugh, soft and unguarded, the sound of a wall coming down not all at once but by inches, the way real trust always rebuilds itself, slowly and only after it's been tested. "I am going to earn this, Sophia," Adrian said, turning to look at her fully now, his voice steady with a conviction she hadn't heard from him even in the middle of the crisis 3 weeks earlier. "Every single day, not with one grand gesture, not with money, not with promises I make once and never revisit. Every single day, for as long as you'll let me try." Sophia looked at her son sleeping in the soft lighthouse glow, Mateo curled with precise, careful posture even in sleep, Leo's hand still loosely holding a corner of his blanket, Rafa sprawled diagonally across his bed in complete disregard for any concept of boundaries. Then she looked at Adrian, not the man who'd once told her to forget his name in a lobby full of guns, and not entirely the stranger who'd walked back into her life 3 weeks ago with a name and a fortune and a debt 3 years overdue. Someone in between, someone still becoming. She reached out and took his hand. They did not get married that night, or that month, or that year. They did not pretend 3 years could be undone by one honest conversation and one broken toast-cutting streak. What they built instead was slower and more real. A partnership tested daily, a trust rebuilt one ordinary evening at a time, a love that had to be earned all over again because the first version of it had been built on a lie neither of them had chosen honestly. But standing in that doorway, her hand in his, watching 3 sleeping boys who had never once needed either of them to be perfect, only present, Adrian Bellaro understood something that no empire, no fortune, no feared reputation had ever managed to teach him. He had spent his whole adult life building something no one could take from him. He had finally found something worth becoming someone better for. So, would you have told Adrian about the children? Or protected them the way Sophia did? Was Sophia right to hide the truth for 3 years? Or did Adrian deserve to know sooner? And could you forgive a man who pushed you away specifically to protect you, even knowing, now, why he did it? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe for more cinematic second chance romances, and share it with someone who believes love finds its way back. Even after 3 years, 3 secrets, and 3 small boys who look exactly like the father they never knew.